I remember the first night like it was yesterday. My name's John Adams, and I'd just taken a job working the night shift at a local factory. The hours were long, the pay was decent, and I figured it was a good way to get ahead. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to experience. The factory was on the edge of town, tucked away in a quiet industrial area. The building looked like it had been around for decades. Old, rusting metal and concrete walls that seemed to absorb every sound. There were only 3 of us working the night shift. Myself, Karen, and Mike. We were supposed to keep everything running smoothly, monitor the machinery, and make sure nothing went wrong. Simple, right? The kind of job where you could zone out and let the hours slip by. I didn't think much of it at first. I walked into the building just before midnight, the fluorescent lights flickering above me. Karen was already at her station, sipping on her coffee. Mike, always the quiet one, was by the machines, staring at the screens with his usual dead-eyed gaze. The silence in the air felt heavy, almost oppressive, but it wasn't anything unusual for a night shift. I was starting to get comfortable when something weird happened. The factory had a distinct hum, a sort of mechanical heartbeat that kept you company in the stillness. But that night, something shifted. The hum grew, distorted. It was like the machines were trying to speak but couldn't quite get the words out. My first instinct was to blame it on the tiredness. Maybe I was just imagining things. But as I looked around, I noticed Karen and Mike had both stopped what they were doing and were staring at the same spot. The maintenance room door. It was locked, but it wasn't always locked. We usually kept it open in case we needed to fix something. It's the kind of thing that doesn't usually raise an eyebrow at 3 a.m. But tonight, I don't know, something was off. The silence stretched on longer than normal. I shrugged it off, trying to get back to work, but then I heard it. A faint noise coming from behind the door. Scratching, like something was trying to get out. I looked at Mike. He was still staring at the door, his face pale. Karen had the same look, like she'd seen a ghost. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. They both nodded, but neither of them spoke. We were all frozen, locked in a moment of confusion and fear. Then the door, it creaked. And that's when I knew something wasn't right. The door creaked again, louder this time. My heart started racing, and a cold chill ran down my spine. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair, and Mike, who had been staring intently at the door, slowly turned to me. His face was pale, almost ghostly, and there was a look in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Fear. Real, raw fear. I couldn't tell if it was my own growing paranoia or if something was really wrong, but I could feel my breathing getting shallow, like the air around us had thickened. The hum from the machinery was still there, but it now seemed distant, like it came from another world. The only sound that mattered now was the scratching from behind the door. "Mike, Karen," I whispered, my voice barely breaking through the tension. "What is that?" Mike shook his head slowly, his eyes darting between me and the door. I don't know, man. I don't know." Karen, who had been quiet up until that point, stood up suddenly, knocking her chair backward with a loud clatter that startled all of us. Her hands were trembling, and her face was drawn tight with dread. "I'm getting out of here," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm not staying another second in this place." Without another word, she turned and bolted toward the exit. But just as she reached the door, something happened. The factory lights flickered violently, first once, then twice, and then the entire building plunged into darkness. Total silence. The sound of the hum was gone. The noise from behind the door ceased, and the world felt empty. I could barely see anything in the blackness. It was like the darkness itself was alive, suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. I could hear Karen's footsteps, frantic, as she fumbled with the exit door. But then her frantic pace stopped. The silence lingered for what felt like an eternity. "Karen?" I called out, my voice barely audible. There was no response. I didn't dare move. My feet felt glued to the floor. I could hear Mike breathing next to me, shallow and erratic, as if he too was unsure of what to do. Then, just as quickly as it had vanished, the light came back on. But something was different. Karen was gone. The exit door stood wide open, but there was no sign of her. No sound. Nothing. Where did she go? I asked, my voice trembling now. Mike didn't answer. He was already moving toward the maintenance room door. I wanted to stop him, to tell him to wait, but I was frozen. Something in the air was pulling us toward it. A force I couldn't understand. Mike reached for the door handle and paused. He turned slowly to me. His face was blank, drained of any emotion. And then he whispered something that I'll never forget. "We're not alone in here." The scratching started again. Louder now, as if it had found its way closer. Something was on the other side of that door. Mike opened it. The door to the maintenance room swung open with a slow, groaning sound, and I could feel the air grow colder. It was as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in a heartbeat. The space beyond the door was pitch black, nothing but shadows and the vague shapes of old equipment scattered about. But what stood out, what immediately caught my eye, was the door at the far end. The door that led to the storage area. It was slightly ajar. Mike stepped into the room without hesitation, and I followed, my legs shaky but driven by something I couldn't explain. There was no sound now, no scratching, just an oppressive stillness that made my skin crawl. We moved cautiously, our shoes scraping on the concrete floor as we approached the open storage door. "Mike," I said, my voice barely a whisper. What if it's just a rat or something? I mean, it could just be an animal, right?" But Mike didn't respond. He just kept walking forward. He reached the door and peeked inside, then slowly turned to look back at me. "John," he said, his voice barely audible. "I don't think it's a rat." My heart stopped. There was something wrong in his voice, something hollow, like he wasn't entirely himself anymore. Before I could ask him what he meant, he stepped through the storage door. I had no choice but to follow him. The air inside was heavier, thick with a musty smell that made my stomach churn. The space was cramped, shelves filled with old tools and boxes of factory parts. But then I saw it. There, lying on the floor in the far corner, was Karen. Her body was twisted in a way that shouldn't have been possible, contorted and unnaturally bent, as if she had been folded in half by an unseen force. Her eyes were wide open, but lifeless. And the worst part? Her mouth was hanging open in a grotesque expression, as if she had screamed just before she died. I froze. My blood ran cold. "Karen," I shouted, rushing to her side. But Mike grabbed my arm roughly, pulling me back. "Don't," he hissed. I struggled to break free from his grip, my mind racing. What the hell is going on? "Mike, we need to get out of here now." But Mike didn't move. He just stood there, staring at Karen's body with that same empty expression. And then I heard it again. The scratching. It was coming from all around us now, louder, like nails scraping on metal. It was a sound that drilled into your skull, relentless, maddening. It was everywhere, behind the walls, under the floor, above us. But the worst part? It was getting closer. I looked at Mike, trying to make sense of the situation, but his eyes, they weren't focused on anything anymore. It was like he wasn't even aware I was there. "Mike, snap out of it," I yelled, shaking him. And that's when I saw it. In the dim light of the storage room, something was moving behind Mike. Something dark, like a shadow but not a shadow. It was alive. A figure, no taller than a man but twisted and inhuman in shape, crawled along the wall, its body bending in unnatural angles, its face hidden by a mass of black, matted hair. The scratching grew louder. Mike turned toward the movement, but it was already too late. The figure lunged. Time slowed down the moment the figure lunged. I barely had time to react. The thing, or whatever it was on Mike in an instant. Its hands, if you could call them that, were long, spindly, and covered in something dark, like oil or soot, with jagged nails that looked like they could tear through steel. His face, God, its face. It was a nightmare. No eyes, just deep, empty sockets, and a mouth that opened far too wide, stretching unnaturally, dripping with what looked like thick, black blood. Mike let out a scream, a sound that was half human, half animal, before the creature grabbed him. It wasn't so much grabbing as it was consuming him, its long fingers curling into his chest, dragging him into the darkness. Mike's screams faded as the creature pulled him back into the shadows. I was paralyzed. I couldn't even think. My brain was still processing what I had just seen, what had just happened. My eyes flicked from where Mike had been to Karen's body, and then I heard it again, the scratching. But this time it wasn't just one sound. It was many, all around me. I was not alone. The walls seemed to be closing in on me. The shadows, they weren't just shadows anymore. They were alive, shifting, crawling, forming shapes that looked like broken people. Faces distorted, hands reaching out, mouths whispering in languages I couldn't understand. I stumbled backward, desperate to escape, but there was nowhere to go. The storage room was too small, and the creature, I don't know how to explain it, but I knew it was still there somewhere. Watching, waiting. That's when I remembered the maintenance door. The only way out. My legs moved on their own, adrenaline kicking in. I had no idea what had happened to Mike, what had happened to Karen, but I knew I couldn't stay here. Not another second. I bolted toward the door, my heart racing, the scratching and whispering growing louder, closing in on me like a pack of hungry wolves. I threw open the door, not caring about the noise, and dashed back into the main factory floor. But as I ran, I heard something behind me. A voice, a whisper that made my blood freeze. "John?" It was Mike's voice, but it wasn't Mike. It was distorted, twisted. It sounded like it was coming from deep within the earth, like the creature was using his voice to lure me back. I didn't stop, couldn't. I made it to the hallway leading out of the factory. The exit door was still open. The light from outside seemed like a beacon, but as I ran toward it, something grabbed my leg. I screamed as I fell to the floor, my hands scraping against the concrete. But when I looked back, there was nothing there. Nothing physical, at least. The air around me seemed to thicken, like 1,000 unseen hands were pulling me back, dragging me down. I kicked and clawed at the floor, my hands now raw from the effort. But then, finally, I broke free. I don't know how I made it out of that place, but I did. The second my foot hit the street outside, I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath, shaking uncontrollably. I never went back, never even looked back at the factory. I've never spoken about this to anyone. What happened to Karen? To Mike? I don't know. I never saw them again. But every night, when the wind howls, I hear that scratching. And I know somehow that whatever I saw in that factory, it's still out there. And it's waiting. I tried to forget. I really did. After that night, I told myself that I'd never think about the factory again. I tried to bury it, to convince myself it was just a bad dream, some kind of hallucination brought on by fatigue. But that's not how it works. Not with something like that. It wasn't long before I realized that no matter how far I ran, the nightmare followed me. The first few nights, I didn't sleep at all. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sounds that I had heard in the factory. The scratching, the whispering, Mike's voice. But it wasn't just in my head. I began to hear it in the real world. At first, it was subtle, just a soft scraping noise on the walls when I was home alone. But as the days passed, it got louder, more insistent, like it was trying to break through from the other side. And the whispers? I couldn't escape those either. Every time I walked down a dark hallway, I could hear them, just behind me. My name. My real name, not the one I used at work or to make small talk. It was like whatever was out there knew me, knew everything about me. I thought about going to the police, but what could I say? Hey, I think a monster dragged my coworkers into some alternate dimension at a factory? No one would believe me. Sounded insane even to me, so I kept it to myself. But the fear never stopped. It followed me in the form of these little things. Flickering lights, whispers in crowded places, shadows that seemed to shift just out of the corner of my eye. It was always there, lurking, waiting for me to let my guard down. And then one night, it finally caught up with me. I was at a bar trying to drink away the memories, trying to feel like a normal person again. I wasn't even thinking about the factory anymore. I was too busy talking to some guy at the counter who was telling me about his work problems. His voice, loud and obnoxious, was the only thing that broke through my mental fog. That was until I heard the scrape. It was faint at first, so faint that I thought it was just the sound of the bar's floorboards creaking. But then it came again, closer, more distinct. I looked around, my heart pounding, but no one else seemed to hear it. The man next to me didn't even flinch. I stood up quickly, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. I didn't care. I had to leave. I had to get out. But as I turned to go, I saw something. In the reflection of the bar's mirror, there was a figure standing just behind me, barely visible. It was so dark, so impossible, that I thought I might be imagining it. But I knew better. I had seen that figure before. I had seen it in the maintenance room, in the storage room, in the factory. I had seen it when it dragged Mike into the darkness. The figure stepped closer, just out of my sight line, but I could feel its presence. The air thickened. The temperature dropped. I ran. I ran like I had never run before, pushing through the door of the bar and into the street. But when I turned to look behind me, there was no one there. No figure. Just the dark, empty streets of the city. I don't know what's real anymore. The lines between the world I used to know and whatever I encountered in that factory have blurred. The creature, the shadows, the whispers, they are not just memories. They are waiting for me to let my guard down again. I know it's still out there somewhere, and I know it will come for me again. It's been a few weeks since that night at the bar. The thing, the creature, the shadow hasn't stopped following me. It's in the creaks of my apartment, in the whispers on the wind, in the dark corners of every room. I can't escape it. No matter how far I go, it's always there, just out of sight, always watching. But tonight, I can feel it. Tonight, I know it's time. I don't know how I know, but I do. It's been pulling me towards something, some kind of final confrontation. The air is thick tonight. The city feels different. And the scratching, it's louder than ever. I'm sitting here now typing this because I know this might be the last thing I ever write. I've stopped sleeping. I've stopped trying to escape. I'm too tired, too worn down to keep fighting it. I don't know where Mike is anymore. I don't know where Karen is. But I know they're not gone. They're still there, somewhere, trapped in whatever nightmare the factory has become. I've realized something. It's not just the factory. It's not just the creatures. It's this place, this world. I think it's all connected. And I think I've been marked, chosen to see it for what it really is. Tonight, I'm going back to the factory. It's the only place where I might finally get answers. If I can face whatever is waiting there, maybe, just maybe, I can put an end to this. But as I pack my bag, I feel that familiar weight in the air. The pressure building. It's getting closer. I'm not sure if I'll survive this, but I have to try. I can't keep living in fear, not knowing what happened to Mike or Karen or the others. Whatever this thing is, whatever they are, they can't keep taking people. Not without a fight. And if I die tonight, if this is the end, then at least someone will know the truth. I'm driving to the factory now. The road is empty, the lights flickering, like they're trying to warn me. The closer I get, the more I feel it, the presence that's been with me all this time. It's not just in the shadows anymore. It's here with me in the car. The scratching starts again. But this time it's inside my head. I see the factory ahead, looming in the darkness. The door to the maintenance room is open again. And beyond it, I know what waits. I don't think I'll make it out this time. But I can't live like this anymore. If anyone finds this, know that the factory is not just a place. It's a doorway to something far worse. And it's waiting for you. Did you like these stories? Write in the comments. And please write what you didn't like. It will be useful for me to know your opinion. And I will improve my work. Thank you. Subscribe to my channel and click the bell so as not to miss new stories. I try for you.